Ladies and gentlemen, if you could take your seats. My name is Steve Heminger. I would like to welcome you to the Bay Area Metro Center. I'm the Executive Director of the Metropolitan Transportation Commission and the Association of Bay Area Governments. I'm also your friendly neighborhood landlord in this facility, so I hope you enjoy it. We are here tonight for the first in a series of presentations about what I would call the wild cards in our transportation future. And autonomy is certainly one of those wild cards, which is why we're starting out with it to begin our series of efforts in better understanding what might be thrown our way. I think you're going to hear about 4 words tonight. At least you're going to hear about them from me. The first is connected. The second is automated. The third is shared. And the fourth is electric. And the acronym, if you can spell it out, is CASE. And I think there are probably at least 4 cases that arise from that acronym. So start with connected. Connected is in a way, and we the title of the paper that you see up on the screen is autonomous. And I keep reminding our staff, I'm an old English major, that connected and autonomous are antonyms. They are not synonyms. They are not the same thing. And if the way we get this done is by connecting vehicles to each other or connecting vehicles to infrastructure, we're going to have a certain outcome. And at the outset, we're probably going to have all the people who have BMWs and Mercedes running around in these kind of vehicles, which sort of lets a whole lot of people out of the whole equation. And if they are connected, it means they are probably a lot more hackable, just as one example. If we had a connected electoral system, we might have elected Donald Duck instead of Donald Trump. So thank good we didn't. The next one is automated. Yeah, I'll let you explore the implications of that. The next one is automated. And I think with automation, we do have the opportunity of extending the benefits of smarter vehicles and less driving by human beings to a broader array of people because the automation won't just be available to certain people in certain vehicles. Shared and electric, I think those are the two that really are going to be the tail of the tape, because it's certainly conceivable that with a connected and automated future, we will have a lot more driving. And that's not necessarily a good thing. And if what we have that survives the shift is the paradigm of individual ownership of vehicles survives the shift with it, then I think we really are probably going to underperform in terms of realizing the benefits of automation, because we will simply have created a lot of vehicles running around on our freeways and local streets without people in them at all. And that's not necessarily a good outcome. And if they're all running around with internal combustion engines and they're not electric, then we have, I think, an emissions challenge that will weigh very heavily on our minds as we go forward. So I am looking forward to hearing from our panelists. One of them is sitting in front of me, a member of the California Air Resources Board, so he probably will have a little bit to say about the electric part. And I think, again, these 4 words, connected, automated, shared, electric, if we can hit 4 for 4, I think we'll have a very good ball game. And if we don't, and it's likely we won't because that's just life, then I think we've got some hard thinking to do about how we move ahead on this very exciting agenda. So, again, welcome, and I believe I'm turning it over to our project director, Matt Maloney, to take the proceedings from there.
I'm going to talk a little bit about this whole Horizon effort that we're going through and a bit about how this perspective paper fits into that effort. Adam Nolting is going to walk you through the presentation of the perspective paper, which was just released today and posted up onto the website. I'm going to introduce the panel that is here and ask them to give you some quick remarks, and then we're going to kind of run a Q&A session with the panel and also open it up to audience questions at that point. So this Horizon effort, we're roughly 5 months into this effort, and it's a new initiative for us and very much a re-envisioning of how we do long-range planning here at the agency. And many of you are familiar with Plan Bay Area, and we've gone through a couple of cycles of that. And moving into this phase, I think we're really trying to kind of re-envision that whole process. And uncertainty is really the big theme of Horizon. And we live in uncertain, sometimes disorienting times, it seems. And I think carrying that through to the future and into 2050, it's really an effort to kind of look at that uncertainty over the next 30 years in an effort to look at not only the external forces around the nation and the globe that are going to affect the Bay Area, but maybe more importantly what the Bay Area can do to deal with it from a strategy perspective. And that's really, I think, where this paper is focused. We have 3 main buckets of work in Horizon, and one of them is the futures planning effort, which is really centered around new scenario, sort of a new scenario building process where we're looking at these external forces out to 2050. This AV effort tonight is the first of these perspective papers, again, which is focused on regional strategies to deal with the external forces. And then the project performance piece is really where we look at investments in capital projects and evaluating the benefits and costs of those. And eventually in 2021, we move forward with a brand new plan, Plan Bay Area 2050. I wanted to recognize before we get started a couple people in the audience who could maybe stand up, Melissa Rule and Will Bumgarner. Will is on the panel tonight, and Melissa is also here. They're both from Arup, and they both were sort of the project managers, co-authors of this effort with us. We worked very closely with them. So thanks for being here, and we'll hear more from Will when we move forward with the panel. So with that, I'm going to introduce Adam Nolting, who's a principal planner here at MTC ABAG, and he's going to take you through the perspective paper.
Thank you, Matt. And good evening, and thank you all for coming. It is an exciting topic for us to discuss, and I'll echo some of the same sentiments that were already previously offered by both Steve and Matt. But I'm going to begin my presentation by taking a few minutes just to define what we mean by AVs in the context of autonomous vehicles perspective paper. Then the majority of the presentation will focus on item 2 on the slide, the implications and strategies. As Matt noted, we are keenly aware that the future is uncertain, and inevitably we will have opportunities and risks. The paper in tonight's presentation uses 5 guiding principles to evaluate those opportunities and risks. And because Horizon is about getting a better understanding of transformative change, we've identified big ideas the region can explore and put to the test in an AV future. So starting at the beginning, what is an autonomous vehicle, or AV? An AV system is a combination of hardware and software that performs a driving function. AVs will eventually be capable of driving themselves, human operators and occupants optional. And we recognize that this capability could have dramatic implications for personal mobility, public transportation, and the movement of goods. As Steve noted, automated is not necessarily connected, but these are often terms we use in the discussion about autonomous vehicles. Connections, as noted, can be to other vehicles, to infrastructure, to other systems. These connections can offer advantages that we above and beyond the line of sight types of technologies that are offered in vehicles today by providing advanced warnings over for distances ahead, what's coming up around the corner, what's over the next hill. But to be clear, as Steve noted, autonomous does not necessarily mean connected, nor does it mean electric or shared. However, it could be. AVs will rely on an array of advanced systems backed by powerful computers and machine learning to navigate complex driving environments. The fundamentals of AV technology are broadly standardized and dependent on 6 key elements shown in the graphic on the slide. These additional technologies, systems are quite easy to spot, as I'm sure many of you have seen AV operating on Bay Area streets, albeit with someone behind the wheel. The next slide focuses on the levels of automation. The Society of Automotive Engineers has established 6 different levels of automation. Levels 1 through 3 all require significant human management at all times, whereas Level 4 allows autonomous driving in specific conditions, such as geofenced locations or under certain weather conditions. Level 5 describes a vehicle that is fully autonomous in any setting, meaning passengers are optional. We're aware that most AV testing operations are on Level 3 and Level 4. And as Matt described, Horizon is a long-range planning effort, in this case 2050. Therefore, the purposes of our AV perspective paper, we are focused on Level 4 and Level 5. Timing is one of the most critical questions, particularly when will AVs be accessible to the public and when will AVs be common on our roadways. Several studies have estimated AVs will reach significant, though not yet majority market penetration in the 2040s, with full market penetration or no human drivers on the roads becoming common in the 2050s and beyond. The figure on the slide represents a broad range of possible uptake scenarios, with AVs at 0 to 15% of the total vehicle fleet in 2020, and increasing to 10 to 100% of the fleet by 2050. In all scenarios, there will be an extended period of time with mixed fleet of autonomous and legacy vehicles. Technology breakthroughs, regulations that govern the roadway, and public acceptance will have major implications on when AVs will become commonplace. In 2017, Arup and MTC conducted a Delphi survey. The participants represented government, industry, and academia, and all had demonstrated expertise in an AV-related field. This slide highlights some of the key findings of that survey. The survey results demonstrate that expert opinion varies on when AVs will become available to travelers and how will they impact travel. In general, experts agree that AVs are likely to be available soon. They will be safer. They will increase roadway capacity, but they will also induce demand. And the environmental impacts are particularly uncertain, as AVs could accelerate the shift to cleaner vehicles, but also increased demand could increase energy usage. This next slide demonstrates the activity that's happening in the Bay Area, showing the various companies as well as the pilots and projects that are happening across our region. The points, as we note, are the various companies. There are over 50 companies in California licensed to test AVs on our public roadways. Not too surprisingly, many of those are clustered in Silicon Valley, as referenced in the map. Also, a number of Bay Area communities are beginning to explore applications of AV technology, including the Contra Costa Transportation Authority and Gomentum Station, the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency and San Francisco County Transportation Authority, the City of San Jose and Livermore Transit Authority. And we acknowledge that this is just a select few of some of the activities that are happening, but we just want to emphasize that it's important to learn from each other's efforts in moving forward. So as we know, there's tremendous uncertainty related to AVs, the timing, the market penetration, the extent to which they will be shared versus owned, the impacts on labor, to public transit ridership, congestion, air quality, safety, and equity. But in order for us to describe the opportunities and risks that AVs will present to our region, we've used 5 guiding principles as an organizational framework for the paper and tonight's presentation. These 5 guiding principles, affordable, connected, diverse, healthy, and vibrant, are a culmination of months of outreach to engage Bay Area residents on what aspects of the region they wanted to maintain and in which aspects of the region they felt needed improvement. These 5 guiding principles will be used throughout the Horizon Initiative, and specifically we use the guiding principles to establish the framework for the AV paper for both to evaluate AVs as well as to identify strategies to seize opportunities and overcome risks. Before I move on to the next series of slides, I wanted to provide a quick orientation of what we'll be looking at. I will begin by presenting opportunities and risks for each of the 5 guiding principles, followed by a slide focused on strategy responses. As noted, Horizon is all about transformative change, so we identified big ideas supported by approximately 3 strategies to achieve opportunities and overcome risks. And I'll note that the paper, specifically Appendix A, provides a more robust menu of strategies. Starting off with the affordable guiding principle, which is focused on providing affordable housing to the region's residents and workers. AVs provide an opportunity, if AVs are shared and function similar to today's taxis or TNCs, Trips will begin and end at the curb rather than at parking lots. Therefore, AVs will likely reduce parking demand, which can facilitate the redevelopment of parking into housing. If the stress of driving is replaced with productive time, leading people to travel longer distance, this could facilitate sprawling land use patterns and lead to higher transportation costs, which is identified as a risk. So our big idea to seize the opportunities and overcome the risks related to affordability is parking to homes. As parking demand decreases with autonomous, demand-responsive shared mobility, this land should be used to alleviate our housing crisis with strategic infill development, such as housing near rail stations. Specific priority strategies to address this big idea include repurposing of off-street parking for infill development, instituting parking maximums for both on- and off-street parking supply, and retaining or strengthening urban growth boundaries to control greenfield development. As we move on to the connected guiding principle, which emphasizes a well-functioning transportation system to connect our region. An opportunity we see is that AVs are likely to increase mobility options with innovative new business models. However, a risk could be that AVs could worsen congestion by inducing new travel from current non-drivers, lowering the cost of travel, and adding empty vehicles to our streets. So the first big idea to seize the opportunities and overcome the risks related to connected is to transform local transit. And we often may limit our imagination of AVs simply to passenger vehicles. However, public transit will have an opportunity to reinvent itself to provide more cost-effective, demand-responsive service and right-size its vehicle fleet. Public transit can evolve with the automation of high-capacity, high-frequency regional trunk lines and demand-responsive local service. Trunk lines like rail lines and bus rapid transit will continue to be our reliable connections to activity centers and will continue to be very effective at moving high volumes of people. However, fixed bus services in low-density areas could be replaced by demand-responsive, door-to-door, first-last-mile services. And finally, with this public transit evolution, mobility as a service models, institutional reform, and public-private partnerships should be considered to optimize the passenger experience and manage costs. Staying on the connected guiding principle, the second big idea is to address the risk of increased vehicle travel with dynamic pricing opportunities, with user fees to improve equity and efficiency and ensure adequate funding for public investments. In order to do this, we can leverage new technology to streamline revenue collection and enforcement and use dynamic pricing to better manage limited capacity. We can also look at reallocation of our streets to be responsive to changing conditions and to provide access to all modes of transportation, including biking and walking. Specific strategies to address this big idea include pricing mobility fairly through dynamic road user charging, designing smart streets with dynamic allocation of street and curb space, and developing industry-wide data sharing protocols to provide real-time information to connected autonomous vehicles. Our third guiding principle is diverse, which focuses on ensuring that all residents have access to the region's assets and resources. By improving an opportunity with AVs related to diverse is that by improving access and making sharing easier, AVs will provide mobility benefits to people from all backgrounds, abilities, and ages. However, a risk is that privately operated AV fleets could compete with public transit for passengers, reducing revenue and exacerbate inequity. The big idea to seize the opportunities and overcome the risks related to diverse is to require equitable outcomes. AV operators, whether they're public or private, should be required to monitor and improve their services to achieve equitable outcomes for all persons. We can do this by mandating equitable coverage of mobility services with transparent reporting, subsidizing public transit innovations in communities of concern, and prioritizing AV mobility services or programs that serve communities of concern. Our next guiding principle is healthy. This guiding principle is focused on protecting our residents and natural environment. So an opportunity of AVs could be that they have the potential to reduce traffic fatalities by all but eliminating human error. And if most AVs are EVs, or electric vehicles, transportation-related greenhouse gas emissions could decrease. Conversely, AVs are likely to introduce new hacking and cybersecurity risks, and if most AVs are not electric vehicles, emissions could increase as induced demand increases. So our big idea to seize the opportunities and overcome the risks related to healthy is Vision Zero 2.0 in order to save lives and improve air quality. We would create a new expanded Vision Zero program to leverage AVs to prevent all types of transportation-related injuries and health issues. AVs are likely to greatly assist cities in the Bay Area in meeting their Vision Zero goals for zero traffic-related deaths, but additionally, AVs could hold the promise of improving our public health outcomes, such as reduced rates of pollution-related illnesses like asthma and heart disease and cancer, from improved air quality with a shift to electric vehicles. Other health benefits may include lower travel-related stress and improving street safety, facilitating more active mobility. Specific strategies could be capping speed limits in downtowns and neighborhoods, mandating that all AVs are electric vehicles and investing in the necessary infrastructure, and developing bounty programs to reducing hacking vulnerabilities. And our final guiding principle is Vibrant, which focuses on job opportunities. AVs have the potential to reduce operating costs by making human drivers redundant, and a risk is that AVs are likely to replace driving jobs, potentially impacting thousands in the Bay Area, many of those being middle-wage jobs. So our big idea to seize the opportunities and overcome the risks related to Vibrant is to foster new industries. We can do this by implementing a comprehensive program designed to maximize the local economic benefits of the technology revolution that is centered in the Bay Area. We can also launch workforce development programs, encourage additional industry investment to maintain the global advantage, spark new related industries, encourage innovation clusters in areas that are economically disadvantaged or particularly at risk for job loss. Specific strategies include strengthening the capacity of training programs to expand opportunities for workers in the AV industry, targeting job clusters on industrially zoned land for production, distribution, and repair, and piloting innovative AV applications that could spur new job opportunities. So this next slide summarizes the big ideas by the 5 guiding principles. And just to recap, our first one under affordable was creating housing opportunity sites. Under connected, it's fair pricing and autonomous transit. Under diverse, we're looking at equitable outcomes. Healthy, Vision Zero 2.0, and Vibrant, a new deal for mobility. And so I just wanted to provide a link to the paper. As Matt noted, the paper has been uploaded to the web for your full viewing. And I know at your chairs now there's a folder that has the executive summary available. But this would conclude my presentation, and I do thank you for your time. So next I'll turn it back to Matt to discuss where we go from here.
Thank you. So I think just briefly is next step. So, we showed you a bunch of big ideas and strategies tonight. So now the question is kind of like, now what? And sort of what's next in terms of the planning process. So I just want to kind of draw you a bit of a roadmap in terms of where we're going. The paper is out. Encourage you to read it. There's a lot in there, and it goes into a lot more detail than what we just showed tonight. I think it's also important that for the sort of the technical geeks in the audience, and there are a few here, we are going to be releasing a bit of an addendum to this paper where we actually go into more detail on some of the big ideas and actually describe some of the example applications. So getting into more detail about sort of how we would evaluate these things, how we might actually use some of our modeling tools to get into them in the planning process. So I encourage you to also look out for that piece. Then this fall, as part of the Horizon effort, we're going to be putting together these workshops which look at our futures. And again, our futures are these sort of varying scenarios of external forces going out to 2050. They will include sort of big changes in terms of technology, environment, politics, et cetera. And it's really in the fall of 2018 where we're looking to put these strategies to the test and hoping to see, to what level, what thresholds do we have to look at in terms of whether these strategies can help us solve the potential regional challenges that we see going out to 2050. So that's really the next step. And then moving forward into the preferred scenario for Plan Bay Area 2050, that's when we'll be sort of, for the first time, offering up our preliminary recommendations of effective policies and programs. So hopefully you understand sort of the logic of this, at least in terms of the planning process. So at this point, I'm going to ask our panel to come on up to the table, and we can start that part of the program. So what I'm going to do now is just do some sort of quick introductions and read more full bios in a moment. But we're really excited to be joined by four really sort of interesting and diverse minds in this field of AVs, folks who have done a lot of work in this space. We have Will Baumgartner from ARUP, who joins us, Ratna Amin from Spur. We have Dr. Dan Sperling, Distinguished Professor of Civil Engineering and Environmental Science and Policy at UC Davis. And then also Bert Kaufman, who's the head of corporate and regulatory affairs at Zoox. And so what we're going to do now is hear from all the panelists in turn, and I'll sort of introduce them in turn as well. So Will Baumgartner first, who helped us, has intimate familiarity with this paper and was one of the lead authors in terms of putting this work together. So he directs ARUP's intelligent mobility business in the Americas. He has over 20 years of multimodal transportation planning experience on site, campus, corridor, and regional projects. His practice is focused on the implications of rapidly emerging urban mobility trends and technologies on the transportation and property markets. And again, he served as principal in charge for MTC's Autonomous Vehicle Horizon Initiative Perspective paper. So, Will, take it away. We're going to ask each of you to sort of give, 5 or so minute remarks, and then we'll get into questions. Okay.
Thank you all very much for coming. Thanks, Matt and MTC for allowing us to be involved in this exciting project. I think it's a real credit to MTC to be taking this approach through the Horizons program and looking at these big variables. And as many of us here in the field appreciate, we're kind of on the cusp of the toe of this curve of increasing change and uncertainty, increasing acceleration of the pace of change. And we're in a world now where we've always done transportation planning by just extrapolating from historic conditions, and we really can't do that. I mean, that's part of the story, but we have to think differently about the futures because they're changing faster, that the impacts of the technology are greater. And I think that's one thing that we found in doing this work for the paper was, we understood going in that the implications were very broad and far-reaching, but we were really able to kind of dig into it here, including kind of thinking about it very much from a Bay Area lens and perspective. So it was a great opportunity to do that, and I think really shed a light on how potentially impactful these changes are, and in a positive way and potentially in a negative way. That's one of the biggest mantras that I talk about all the time is just this incredible opportunity that we have, with new tools in the shed to solve our nagging transportation problems, but at the same time, they could be a double-edged sword. And we really wanted to highlight that in the work and try to illustrate, the positive and the negative, with the hope of helping the region prepare and be proactive about achieving the best possible outcomes. I think that the Bay Area is really uniquely situated. My company works all over the world. I have colleagues, that are working on these issues in Singapore and in London and in Australia and different places. And, we are the center of the universe on this technology. And getting into these policy explorations, we're also, I think, ahead of the curve. And rightfully so, because a lot of the impacts are a lot of the rollout is going to happen here for a number of reasons. But so we have the opportunity to set best practice. This is going to be a race, to figure out how to manage this and how to create the best possible outcomes. And a lot of the goals are going to be similar around the world. and a lot of the solutions are going to be similar around the world. And so we have the opportunity to get out ahead of it. We have a collaborative spirit and a creative spirit, and an incredible amount of capacity of intellectual and fiscal capacity here in the Bay Area to really get out ahead. And I think the rest of the world's going to be looking to us, and hopefully we get it right. But that's part of the issue. Is we will be in an exploration time, and I think public and private collaboration and academic collaboration and nonprofit and community-based organizations all have a role to play in achieving the best possible outcomes. So I guess the last thing I'll say is I do think it's really critical that we have both strong, very, very strong leadership on this front, because I think some of the solutions are going to be difficult to get implemented, and I hope that we can do it before we hit crisis mode on some of these risks. I hope we can be proactive about it, but it's going to take a tremendous amount of leadership and collaboration and cooperation on both the public and the private side, and also a lot of, I think, education to help people understand where this could be going. And then the last thing I'll say is I'm really eager to see how some of these ideas play out through the analysis process that MTC is going to be doing. I think quantifying some of these impacts specifically as they apply to the Bay Area in our local conditions are going to be really, really crucial to understanding, what should the response be, and how what is really the scale of the opportunity and of the risk, and it's going to underscore how important this is and hopefully help us find the right combinations of strategies. So thanks again for having me.
So, Ratna, we're going to move on to you. And Ratna leads Spur's work to create a high-quality transportation system in the Bay Area region, and her areas of focus include public transit, land use, and transportation integration. In 2014, Ratna published Spur's first transportation policy report about Silicon Valley, called Freedom to Move. More recently, she published Seamless Transit, an agenda to address the Bay Area's tragic transit fragmentation problem. She was named as the Bay Area's WTS Woman of the Year in 2018 and to Mass Transit Magazine's Top 40 Under 40 in 2015, an alumnus of the San Francisco Coro Fellows Program in Public Affairs and of Teach for America. So, Ratna, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Matt, and everyone for having Spur up here on the panel. And for those of you who don't know, Spur is a nonprofit member-supported organization with offices in San Francisco, San Jose, and Oakland, and we work on transportation as well as many other urban and regional issues. And its AVs have actually, I started Spur a little over 5 years ago, and we used to do internal staff presentations, and I did my very first one on AVs, and people freaked out and argued with me that this could possibly be real or better in any way. And I think now the conversation is completely different, and people are quite aware of the pros and cons and the policy strategies that we might need to pursue. And now we have scenario planning, and it's just incredible how robust the conversation is now. At Spur, we've also looked at some scenarios for the future of the Bay Area, some of which we'll publish next month in the Urbanist magazine. And what was really fun a few months ago was to overlay AVs with other types of major changes that could happen or continued trends in our region. And some really interesting interactions emerged that I want to just quickly highlight for you. We don't know what's going to happen in this region, and there are a few possible futures, and I know that in MTC's Horizons work there's some similar futures. But take, for example, a future that might be a continuation of current trends, which is like a gated utopia, maybe like a London or another city where the wealthy have the best access and the best things, and even good public goods, whereas the less wealthy are at the edges of the region and have fewer choices, and take that to an extreme with maybe a few more million people. Well, what happens with AVs in that scenario? And, well, nobody knows for sure, but maybe we have a lot of private AV use, which I think people in this room don't want to see, and maybe we use AVs to bring in workers from the edges of the region, and it's not necessarily good service. Those are 2-hour trips. Maybe they're still in traffic. Maybe we haven't solved the problem for everyone. Another type of scenario is like a Bunker Bay area where we have decline, which is entirely possible in our region in the next few decades. The tech boom dies off. We don't have new industries to replace it, and we have social or political disintegration as well. And so we haven't invested in the public systems while we've also declined. And this one's kind of a scarier scenario for AVs, where it's heavy private ownership and private governance of the transportation system. And AVs are surveillance cars. They have algorithms that continue biases that we already have. And so the public benefit is really low. And in this one, we haven't invested in public transit or public solutions that everyone can benefit from, or subsidizing lower-income people. And maybe in this one, it gets very dark. You have favelas, and maybe AV companies don't, or mobility companies don't even want to send their vehicles into those places. And then there's, I think, one that we're here to talk about today, where we have a lot of public foresight and ownership and investment in the system, and we do the right policy things, which I'm sure we'll talk more about here today. But we also invest in great cities. And I should have mentioned earlier that that's maybe what Spur's focused on the most, is what happens to our places at the end of the day. Do we have great cities that can accommodate more and more people without cars, with walking or other modes, where people can connect with each other at the end of the day? So there is the scenario where we have so much public leadership and investment that we can achieve that for our cities. I'll stop there, but I hope that's helpful to give you some of our thoughts about scenarios for AVs.
Thanks, Ratna. We're excited to have Dr. Dan Sperling with us as well tonight. Dan Sperling is a distinguished professor of civil engineering and environmental science and policy. He's founding director of the Institute of Transportation Studies at the University of California, Davis. He holds the transportation seat on the California Air Resources Board and served as chair of the Transportation Research Board of the National Academies in 2015 to 16. He has many awards and recognitions. He served twice as lead author for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which he won a Nobel Peace Prize in 2007, testifying 7 times to the U.S. Congress and providing 50 keynote presentations in the last 5 years. He's authored or co-authored over 250 technical papers and 12 books, including 2 Billion Cars in 2009 and 3 Revolutions, which I've been reading on my commute every day, steering automated, shared, and electric vehicles to a better future in 2018. Last but not least, you were on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart in 2009. So thanks for joining us, Dr. Dan Sperling, and let us know your thoughts.
Well, thank you so much. Actually, people think that 5 minutes with Jon Stewart is the highlight of my career. Forget all those books and papers and everything else. So I have a lot of thoughts here, and so many thoughts. I should write a book. Oh, wait a minute, I did. How many of you have seen my books? Quite a few people came up to me. All right, okay. So that was my market research for the day. I really like, the thrust of where this is going, because, in fact, a lot of the initiatives, a lot of the responsibility for steering these, what I call the 3 revolutions, Steve calls them four case, but, case, 3 revolutions, which sounds more interesting or compelling? So I just roll together the connected and automated, as Steve was saying, actually, and just call it automated just for simplicity's sake. But we're talking about the same thing. And I think I'd like to start with the point that we have the opportunity for the first time in decades to create a truly sustainable transportation system. And that by itself is kind of mind-boggling. And for many of us have been working in transportation for decades and look back and we go, what were we doing? Nothing happened. There was so little innovation, transformational innovations taking place. And now we have all of these innovations either starting to happen or on the cusp of it in the case of the automated vehicles. And so we have an opportunity here, and that's why I'm just delighted to see this activity, because we have an opportunity, and I'd like to have a positive focus. So yes, we can talk about what some of us call the hell scenario, and that certainly can play out. But I think what we want to do is focus on how do we direct all of these innovations and transformations and business models to the public interest. And I think that is really why we're here, and hopefully that's why, that's what this will all be about. So there are a few major points that I wanted to emphasize. I saw these. I haven't seen the paper. I didn't know it was available today, but I saw these beforehand. And maybe to help a little on helping us all really articulate what are the themes. Because I've been doing a lot of talks lately. I've been all over the world, actually. I was in China last week, but a lot of different places in California, the U.S. And I've really been trying to hone these messages, like what messages really resonate with people and political leaders and business leaders. And there's a few that have really, emerged for me. One theme is we need to increase choice. So that really resonates well. Choice, what's more American than that, right? But it's in the sense that it's going beyond what Steve was calling I wrote it down, paradigm of individual ownership. That's what we have here. I call it car-centric transportation, car-centric cities. How do we get beyond that, and how do we get beyond the individual ownership? Because only in that way are we going to have this truly sustainable transportation system. And so choice means, and when I say choice, a second part of that is pooling. And pooling is a big part of it. So that's what I'm using instead of sharing now, because sharing is such a vague word. And even the rideshare companies are using that. So UberX and Lyft, they're sharing. But what we want is not a single occupant riders. We want multiple occupant in those vehicles. And so Uber Pool, Lyft Line, the microtransit services that we've been referring to, those are what I call pooling, as well as conventional transit. And so we need to emphasize choice so that then we can move beyond this focus on individual ownership. Because right now, people, if you do anything that makes it more costly or difficult to use a car, you're in big trouble. I mean, we're voting in November on whether to rescind a 12-cent gasoline tax. It's like, oh, please, I mean, but people legitimately feel that if you raise the gas tax, they have no choice, and therefore you're just punishing them because they have to drive their car, they have to use gasoline, they have no choice. And so, there's some legitimacy to it, but our function, we, the Bay community here, is to increase choice. So then we can get to the pricing, all these good pricing things that so many of us love. Some of them are simple, and I hope we get to some of the very simple pricing ones that we can do. Another key message is, I think, the way we sell this is we say, our goal is not to get rid of car ownership. That's not going to sell very well. Our goal is to increase passenger mile travel, increase mobility, and decrease vehicle use, decrease vehicle miles traveled. It's a more positive way of spinning it. We want to improve mobility. We want to improve accessibility. Our goal is to provide more people with more accessibility. And I think that's something, try it out with your audiences here. I think that my experience is it resonates well. And the last big idea I wanted to mention goes back to transit. And I think we have to, Bay Area is a perfect example of, I don't know, what adjective should I use? Fragmented, that's a nice word. It's a transit system that needs to be reinvented. And a big part, so I'm going to bring this back to MTC, something that was missing from all the slides, and that is finance, transportation finance. There was a little bit of mention of, let me see what the words were. Let me find it. It was it was subsidized transit innovations in communities of concern. I'd go way beyond that. That's the right idea, but go way beyond that. We need transit. Transit right now in the U.S. serves 1% of passenger miles. In the Bay Area, it's probably 2 or 3, if you do it. And you can always make bigger numbers if you want to be, if you're an advocate, it's 5% of work trips and so on. But it really comes down to about 1 or 2%. So it's not serving our needs. It's serving a few people and a few things. It moves a lot of people from one place to another really well. But it doesn't work most of the time. So we need to get conventional transit focused on what it does well and figure out how to integrate it into this other whole new suite of services and technologies and business models. And a beginning could be, yes, we should, a little example of it is this one that was brought up about subsidizing transit in communities of concern is that right now all this money is allocated by formula, goes to the transit operators, but I know like Livermore, the guy there that runs it did an innovation where he's paying people to use Uber and Lyft instead of having to run transit lines in low-density areas. But we need to take that much further. Why not? And I'm working in the Central Valley also on some of these ideas. But why not use some of that transportation funding, that we're going to save by have transit do what it does well, get higher load factors, and then subsidize low-income riders and others in the less dense areas. But a lot of that money is going to have to flow through the private sector, and that's something we don't do now. And so that's another thing I would urge is thinking about how to do this in a way that really makes sense in terms of reinventing transit and having it more integrated. So anyway, I got lots more ideas, obviously, but I'll stop there.
So our last panelist, we thought it was a good idea to invite industry tonight, and so we've got one of the guys here, and this is Bert Kaufman, head of corporate and regulatory affairs at Zoox, which is developing a fully autonomous vehicle and a ride-sharing service to support it. So prior to joining Zoox, Bert advised Revolution, the Case Foundation, and Glassdoor Incorporated from 2013 to early 2016. You've also have government experience. You served as senior advisor in Penny Pritzker's office at U.S. Department of Commerce, where you helped lead the Secretary's engagement with the U.S. and global business community. And prior to joining the Obama administration, Bert served as executive director at Business Forward, an organization he launched in 2009, which fosters partnerships between business leaders and policymakers. He also worked for CNN in Washington, D.C. and London, and has clerked in U.S. District Court. And he has undergraduate master's and law degrees from Syracuse University. Lots of time in upstate New York.
That's right. Lots of
And he's only 25.
Look, it's my dilemma. I'm about 10 years older than that. But it really is wonderful to be here with everybody tonight. And there's so many experts at this table and then in the audience as well. And like Professor Sperling, I think I could start in any number of places. But I think I'll do something a bit different than what I usually do, and that is by asking how many of you have heard or know what zooanthelle is? All right, so one hand. So we'll go to marine biology class for a moment. A zooanthelle is a unicellular microscopic phytoplankton. It gets its energy from the sun. It helps coral reefs grow through photosynthesis, and it really helps them grow into these beautiful, diverse ecosystems. zooanthellae also have a symbiotic relationship with the corals and the coral reefs. And so that symbiotic relationship is the metaphor on which the company that I work for, Zoox, was founded on. So Zoox, just to give you a little bit of a background, is turning 4 in July. We are a mission-driven company built to solve problems around safety risks, congestion, and pollution in dense urban environments. And the way we're doing that is developing from the ground up a fully autonomous battery electric vehicle that's designed to be shared in city environments. The vehicle that we're developing doesn't look like a conventional car. The challenge that our co-founders have given us is that if we can imagine what the future looks like in 10 years, let's not wait 10 years to build it, but let's try to build it today. And so that's what we're doing. Under one roof, we're a team of about 500 software engineers, vehicle engineers, other kinds of functions, designers, working to build this mobility service from the ground up. And currently, we're testing our autonomous system on conventional vehicles here in downtown San Francisco. We're driving during the daytime, nighttime, in heavy rain and dense fog on the freeways as well. What I thought I would do is share a couple of thoughts about what we saw up on the screen, and then some other ideas that we have at Zoox that are informing our thinking about how we're building the service. I really love this idea of Vision Zero 2.0. So much of what we're working on right now is around mitigating safety risks. 94% of crashes today, or fatalities and crashes, are caused by human choice or error. One of the reasons why policymakers are so excited about this at all levels of government is that the autonomous system is never going to be drunk, distracted, drowsy. Vehicles themselves also, conventional vehicles, sit idle for about 95% of their lives. They're just not moving. By developing the service, we think we can optimize that. But our overarching view at Zoox is that autonomous technology is going to usher in a paradigm shift as large as when we transition from the age of the horse and carriage to the age of the automobile. And we're at sort of the early days of this. This is like the beginning of flight. The foundational technologies for fully autonomous transportation and vehicles are understood, but even today they're not yet productized, decosted, or well integrated. So you see a whole host of autonomous vehicles on the road here in San Francisco, but they're really conventional vehicles with sensors bolted onto roof racks. Our view is that the first rollouts of fully autonomous vehicles will happen in cities in a ride-sharing application, not in vehicles sold to customers. The reality of the situation is that the technology, the compute that has to go into these vehicles is very expensive, and it's cost prohibitive to actually sell these things. Cities are both going to embrace and fight AVs at the same time. There are going to be pockets of cities that are going to welcome this technology with open arms, and there are going to be pockets of the same city that will really not. The ecosystem for autonomous vehicles is fundamentally different from conventional vehicles. That's one of the reasons why you see so much merger and acquisition activity in the space today. Companies are all trying to put the pieces together, whether it's the ability to build a vehicle or develop the software or run a service. At Zoox, we're building about 13 different startups under one roof. It's pretty ambitious, but the bet that our co-founders made is that this is the right way to really tackle this technology. Fatalities and crashes, back to the Vision Zero 2.0 point, will be vastly reduced. We can't expect to completely eliminate them from day one. I think that was reflected in the survey that Melissa had worked on. The cost of mobility is also going to come down significantly, but the service could initially be a little bit more expensive than what you read in the press. There's a lot of guessing and hand-waving going on around what the charging or what the fee structure is going to be for this service, and it's even too early for us to talk about it. AVs are going to drive business model convergence in the transportation sector. The product experience is going to be a massive source of differentiation. But we think, and this is back to the notion of choice, the biggest winners are going to be cities. The biggest winners are going to be people who want to use the service for that point-to-point mobility. And when you think about and read in the press about autonomous technology or autonomous mobility, you really have to hone in and ask yourself, okay, what is that developer working on or working towards? Because there's so many different use cases for the technology that people are developing right now, whether it's first and last mile or package delivery or service in a closed campus-like environment. We're trying to tackle what's really hard first, and that is dense urban environments. And so far, so good. It's been a pretty good news story for us testing the technology on the roads. And it's again, really great to be here and excited to read the paper when I've got some time.
So in terms of the first question for the panel, I wanted to talk a little bit about safety. And Bert, you kind of talked about the emphasis on safety of those things. And then I also kind of wanted to bring human nature into it a little bit. So safety appears to be one of the more promising aspects of increased autonomous vehicle penetration. If human beings can kind of like peel themselves away from the wheel. And one of the quotes in Professor Sperling's book I was kind of reading this morning, and I just liked it, was you're pointing out the human reticence to cede control. In other words, for large swaths of our population, driving the automobile is really baked into our DNA, not just sitting in the automobile, but actually driving the thing itself. So if we're going to try to reach these lofty sharing goals and even safety goals, how can the region help to break that paradigm, whether it's sort of investments, different pricing signals, or regulations? And maybe since it's your quote, Professor Sperling, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, I think so. There's two parts to it. One is owning and driving a vehicle, and the other piece of the behavior is actually is sharing rides with other people, and both of those are un-American, let's say, but those are the two that we need to target. I think the reticence part, I think that'll go away. The part about some people are really wedded to their vehicle in a different kind of way. It's like this is where all their stuff is, their tennis rackets, they carry their dogs. And there are legitimate reasons why you would want a vehicle. So, I think we need to talk about this trend. So we don't understand behavior real well. I've got a whole team of people trying to understand under what conditions will people share rides and give up car ownership at UC Davis, and there's a number at Berkeley and UCLA as well that we're working with. So this is going to be a gradual process, and that's why this question, your question right now is, what can we do now? What are some specific actions to start pushing us in that direction? And that is what we have to do, because there's some people, they're going to go kicking and screaming, with their car, and they're going to maintain it. But there's lots of people. I was just out at Sandia National Lab this afternoon, and there was a woman that said, I moved from LA to the Bay Area because I didn't want to have to drive a car, and for 14 years I didn't. Then I got a job at Sandia in Livermore, and I can't, now I need a car and I have to drive, and she's so upset and so frustrated about it. So there is a large segment of, this audience is probably if I asked how many of you have cars, I bet there's a good chunk of you that probably don't even have cars. And that's not normal. So we need, without getting, because I could go on and on about exactly what we could do, and I do want to come back to it, but there are things we can do to start moving us in that direction. But I think supporting choice is a big part of it, and that's pooling. So I don't work for Lyft or Uber, but those two companies, they're the ones that have been the trailblazers here. And they took the first step, where they have, the single passenger service, which has been really opened the door to this whole idea of using apps and demand responsive, and they've worked out a lot of the ideas. They've gotten people to get, accustomed to the idea of going in other people's cars and so on. But really, it's not, that by itself is not a societal contribution. It's a contribution to individuals. I love it. But it's not, it increases VMT. It's still expensive. But they're taking it to the next level, to Uber pool service and Lyft line. And I think part of our job is to champion those things. That's what I tell. I'm meeting with a lot of mayors and city councils. Your job is to not just support it, but champion it, because that is the path forward here. There's other paths related to that, but that is the path forward. And I think that, we really need to get that in our heads and get over whatever qualms we might have about the former CEO of Uber and other things. But that is something that's really important, and that is going to set the stage for us to be able to do a lot of these other things.
Panel, any other responses?
I'll go. So a couple of thoughts. This is a really interesting point about the behavioral thing. When I read this quote, I also thought there are a lot of humans who don't drive and are not wedded to driving because they can't drive, they're physically unable, or it's illegal for them to drive, or they don't have access to a car. So I think maybe the people who have to give up their cars will be the loudest with their concerns, but there are actually a whole bunch of other people out there. Beyond pooling as a way, what are we moving people towards if we're moving them away from their private cars? So pooling and being chauffeured or in an AV is certainly one way we want to pull them. But the other way I think we want to pull them is out of a car completely. And we have created such an unpleasant non-auto experience in so many of our communities. And there's so many barriers, whether they're safety, physical barriers, the threat of being hit by a car, the being in the elements, waiting on many of our BART platforms is really, and not to single out BART, many transit stops or stations is a really unpleasant experience. Wayfinding, we could just go on, and I could go on and on about the ways we've made the non-auto experience a poorly designed experience that's uncomfortable, especially for children or families or people who need to wait, and I would argue women. So I don't think we can pull or have this behavior change or pull people out of their controlling their own cars until we make a really much more pleasant experience outside of the car and making those trips. And the amount of investment you see at an Uber or Lyft in the user experience, we don't even do maybe 1% of that in the public sector, in the public realm. So I think that's a place we need to probably change what we're doing.
I'll jump in. I think we should be reticent. I think we should hold this technology to the highest possible standard, and I think people will inevitably, whether the government does or not. I think people will vote with their feet. At the same time, though, there is tremendous potential, and I think the theme of choice is a huge one. I think that's really great that it came out. I mean, there's a reason why the car is as popular as it is. It's the lowest common denominator. It can kind of do everything reasonably well with a whole bunch of negative externalities, but you can basically meet most of your transportation needs for most people, or a large share of the population. And we really have very limited options historically. The choices have been fairly binary. And what's so exciting to me is to think about a future where, every trip I take during the day, I can scale and right size the vehicle, that, I can cycle, I can not cycle. So I think that's particularly exciting in terms of, what we can do and some of the, I think, earlier applications. I mean, for me, talking about some of these, addressing some of these big challenges, particularly around the kind of suburban and rural and community of concern public transportation is a huge one. It's low-hanging fruit in the fact that it's expensive and the service is terrible. You have to low frequency, limited coverage, and they're doing the best they can, but we're trying to push water uphill. So to have new tools to do that, I think we're already seeing definitely some of the regional transportation, public transportation operators experimenting with this, as was mentioned. But I think we should really go kind of all in on that and really figure out the best way to make that work, because that will spread like, I don't want to say wildfire, but it'll spread. But we have to figure out, there's a lot of issues there, and how does that work, and how do people get access, but it's interesting to think about what that could become. So the other thing I think that I would pick up on is this idea of active mobility, and for those of us who cycle a fair bit, there's hostile drivers, there's inattentive drivers, there's just natural situations where you're in a blind spot and you don't see a turn signal, and there's all sorts of things that a vehicle that could see 360 degrees and see in the dark. The opportunity to have that predictability and that reliability from someone who's on the streets, who's a vulnerable user, is tremendous. And I think we're already making our streets more multimodal, and I think we should really double down on that, with the expectation that not only can we physically make the infrastructure safer, we're going to be making the other vehicles safer too. So there's going to be compounding returns on those investments. So those public transit and active mobility would be the two areas that I would kind of stress first to try to leverage the benefits.
Yeah, and the only other point that I would add is that you really have to break out urban versus rural when you look at what the future is going to be. I think we definitely see a more urbanizing world. People are moving into cities, and it's not going to be tenable for people to own vehicles. And so you have to give them good choices, safe choices within their environments. I also think there's an adoption curve as well. There are the early adopters that will really jump into these kinds of vehicles. There are people today who still don't get on airplanes, even though it's the safest mode of transportation. And so, you have to sort of handle the adoption curve, understanding that, it'll be pretty traditional. And also for areas that are seeing really big population growth, how are you incentivizing things like, or how are companies like Uber and Lyft doing in 3 years what it took the government 30 or 40 years to do, and that's incentivizing people to share a vehicle and to pool. So I think you'll see a lot of really interesting innovations.
So I think we'd like to open it up to the audience in some Q&A. There's a couple folks walking around with mics. I see there's a question right here. And you can ask your question to the whole panel or an individual person or whatever you choose.
Thank you. This is for everyone, and it's two parts. One, I just wanted to reflect on your comment, William, on bicycles and being safer out there. I think I haven't heard anything about exploring the opposite direction of automating bicycles in the same way, so that the user is alerted of possible impacts coming up and things like that. It also made me think about small devices we could use to speak to cars as pedestrians and bicycles, or maybe they're implanted in the bicycle so that the vehicles are communicating cross-sector. The question I wanted to ask was more of a hypothetical. What if SFMTA stopped being an operator and just became a service, sold the bus fleet, invested in Clipper cards, required all operators of any kind of mobility service to be part of Clipper, just threw all of their money in that direction? Paratransit still exists, there's still some vehicles, but stopped operating the buses and the trains. What happens?
Well, that's clearly an undesirable future. I don't think anyone is suggesting that in any way whatsoever. In fact, I think, San Francisco is the kind of the epitome of what we want in terms of a place for transit, for conventional transit, I'll call it. It's a high-density area, and we want buses and rail are by far the best way to move large numbers of people from one place to another. And if you have large numbers of people going from one place to another, you want buses and rail. So we want to double down on that, make that better. But and so I don't know this. I know San Francisco moderately well, but I don't know to what extent there might be areas that are not well served. And there's probably, origins and destinations that it could be complemented. But I think San Francisco itself is not necessarily the target of our discussion here. I think it's when you're getting out in a broader way to, the suburbs, the smaller cities, the less dense cities. That's where the challenges are. That's where the cost of transit is extraordinarily high. And that's what I think we want to focus on the biking. So I'm a biker, and it reminded me of one thing I didn't see in that report, or at least in the PowerPoints, is using. So there's a discussion of using freed up parking space for, a number of things. I would say use it for bike infrastructure. That's our golden opportunity. The problem with bikes now is we don't have a safe place to bike. And it's hard taking away road space from cars, although it's happening a little bit. But this is a golden opportunity. So I would urge that in the report.
Yeah, just a couple additional thoughts. I mean, the idea of equipping other road users with technology to make them safer is definitely out there. I know I've seen Qualcomm and other companies, Nissan, experimenting with those sorts of things where people have either an app on their phone or some kind of a beacon or something like that. I think NACTO's perspective on this is well, you shouldn't have to do something like that. You should be safe no matter what. And I totally agree with that. I do think that there's always more you can do. So I think that there are some exciting opportunities to do better on that. And I think the predictability of driving behavior, whether you're sort of that's being communicated to you in some electronic way or it's just because vehicles are driving in more predictable ways, I think it's really positive. Definitely echo Dan's sentiment. I mean, we took a lot of care in the report to really differentiate types of public transit. There's no other way to move, 20, 30, 40,000 people an hour in 12, 15 feet of right-of-way that you can on a BART track. And so the high-density trunk lines where we need speed, reliability, capacity, those can't go away. Those are the lifeblood of cities. But as soon as you get away from that, though, and including the first last mile connections to that, and all these other areas that are just really, really struggling to provide a reasonable level of mobility and accessibility, that's where we want to go all in on thinking about re-envisioning the public transit system. I do think in those circumstances there's the opportunity for the agencies to potentially consolidate, but also get out of the direct operations business. I mean, a lot of them already do contract out the service, but there's a kind of a school of thought that some of these transportation agencies can become more like mobility brokers, where they're just procuring access and mobility and then kind of packaging it and reselling it. I think what's really exciting is if you start to think about how, if you're looking at a system-wide situation where inevitably you have a lot of empty seats going off peak and a lot of empty seats going in the reverse direction, that's basically just unused capacity. And so if we can subsidize someone to get to a reverse direction BART trip on a better automated first last mile connection, all of a sudden there's kind of potentially a win-win scenario with better productivity of the core systems as well as improved accessibility and mobility for users. And I do think the private sector has a huge role to play, and I think this is a potentially rocky situation, but also really worth looking at because of how nimble the private sector is. The user focus is critical, and I think there's a lot of times we see that things that the private sector can do in terms of innovation and experimentation and speed that they can deliver things is just a completely different ballpark from what the public sector can do. But we're going to have to really be really carefully thinking about how that is rolled out, particularly, and I think the opportunity to subsidize that creates the opportunity to regulate it, and not necessarily in a sort of top-down way. It's just, look, if you want the contract to provide the service, we have these equity service metrics and minimum response times and service hours, and there's things that we can put through. And I do think there's win-wins there when you're talking about $10 to $20 a ride of what we're currently paying for these services. That I do think there's an opportunity to leverage the private sector, reduce costs, provide better service, and maintain equitable public transportation.
Any other questions? We got one here.
Hi, John Addison. A question about funding. So often funding kind of drives where we go forward, and the real challenge now is fix it first. Could swallow up all our money for the roads the way they are, for replacing buses and so on. How would you recommend we allocate money? Are there areas where we don't have to kind of fix the way we used to do things and instead ship money to autonomous shuttles, other ways of moving people around?
I can start on this one. It comes up a lot. First, a comment about money. The amount of private investment in AVs is probably about $1 trillion. So there's just this incredible flood of money into this technology arms race. It's on its own in the Bay Area, a huge sector of the economy and the wealth being created here. I often hear this, to paraphrase what you're saying, a proposal of shifting funding away from certain things we do today to other things that we do. And I think there are probably specific opportunities for that. But what worries me when I hear that is that there's this idea of keeping things level or flat, and that we can just shift what we're spending. And in every scenario we looked at, we need to invest more, and we need to actually capture. And we are wealthy regions. So we think we need to spend more. And the reason I say that is because to create, again, the places, the types of quality of space that we want to be, and add millions more people, you actually do want to invest in infrastructure, putting things underground specifically, which is very expensive to put trains or even cars or bikes or whatever it is underground, have underground stations, and we can create really nice places like the neighborhood where we are today. And that takes a lot of money that we need to actually add to the pie. So while there might be certain rail lines that comes up, or especially highways or road expansions that are not justifiable in an AV scenario, I would argue that we actually still probably need to add overall investment to the pie, and that we could afford it in the region today.
It's a great question. You really inspired me to go back and really think this through carefully. Clearly, we've starved transit for decades and decades now, and that's part of the problem we have now. Is we've starved it so much, it doesn't really have the capacity to be innovative and creative, because they're just trying to get the drivers and the buses and on time and running. And so that's one of the things that worries me a lot, is because I think it would be great if we could provide more responsibility to transit operators to be essentially the portal for people's transportation choices. I mean, this, in my eyes, that would be the ideal. And I guess I mentioned briefly, some European cities are going in that direction, where you just say, okay, I'm going to make a trip, and put in your destination, and tells you what are the best choices and how to get there, and it also takes care of all your money payments, like a Clipper card or Uber or Lyft. But I don't think any of our transit operators have that capacity. Certainly in the Bay Area, there's so many of them. Where would you even start? Maybe LA with LA Metro. Maybe they could pull it off. But that would be the ideal, having a single portal, all the information and all the money flow through that. Now, what does that mean? That's one part of it. And the other part is, so we've starved it, so that's probably an implausible option. And so that's why I go back to this idea, maybe if we can get so transit's running a lot of routes that are really expensive, low density, and they do it for a variety of reasons that are often, sometimes political reasons, sometimes others. But if we can get transit to pull back and do what it really does well, do those trunk line routes, do those main lines, save a lot of money, ideally give them more money, and then really focus the other services on first, last mile, fill in the gaps, lower density. I think we're getting much closer to an efficient, rational, equitable transportation system. They'll provide much better service to a lot more people if we had something like that. But every region is going to be different. So that's why I'm excited here in the Bay Area. It's got its kind of challenge of so many transit operators, but maybe, good luck, guys.
Yeah, I'd love to see us completely rethink how we do transportation finance, because we know that the system we have right now is diminishing returns on the gas tax. We know that we need to manage the system more efficiently. And we also, we're moving towards more aggressive ways of funding it, sales taxes, and, less tied to the users and who's actually kind of consuming that resource. And so how we get there is the tricky bit, but I think we have to have pricing not just to fund things properly, but also to manage the situation. I mean, to me, I'm a traffic engineer. I'm an old traffic engineer, and I think about trip generation and the impacts on streets and congestion, and empty vehicle circulation keeps me up at night. Because there's great stories there about reducing parking, but the additional trip generation is really scary, and I think pricing is going to be a mechanism that we have to control that, or at least check it. At the same time, it could solve many other problems that we have in the finance side of transportation, and do it more equitably. So getting the politics aligned and getting the public behind that is the bazillion-dollar question.
And I would just, the one thing I would tack onto that, it's one thing to build out the autonomous technology and develop the vehicle itself and all of the things that you need to operate it safely, but one of the most non-trivial pieces of this is charging infrastructure. So where does it go in cities or in areas where real estate is really hard to come by, where it's really expensive, where you've got to bring a lot of energy and electricity into it? And so I think that's just one really big piece that needs to be a part of everybody's thinking in all of this. There could be some interesting funding around that rather than put it directly into the AV technology. If an AV developer came to you as a transit operator today and said, we can help automate your fleet, there is still so much work that needs to go into proving out the safety of these systems over the next, I would say 2 to 5 years. That we're not ready for prime time at this stage. Google Waymo has been at this for 10 years, and they are just getting ready to take a safety driver out of their vehicles. And by the way, the vehicles that they're using are conventional vehicles that are optimized around a human driver. They're not optimized around the AV technology. So just some things to think about, as you see a lot of the headlines around this technology. But one of the pieces that I think gets ignored in all of this is, if we do want these fleets to be electric, is it going to be a centralized node, or is it going to be more distributed across a region? How are we getting enough electricity into these areas to deploy the kind of services that we want?
So we are around at time. We have time for maybe one more quick question. If we got one, there's a few hands. So we got a microphone? Okay.
Dr. Sperling, I haven't read your book yet, so I apologize if it's answered in the book. But my question is about using freeways as new mass transit backbones, given that companies like Navia are testing 10-person shuttles in Las Vegas and other places, and an express lane could move 1,600 shuttles per hour with 10 passengers. That's 16,000 people, which is over half of BART's Transbay Tube ridership. Even if the vehicles only hold 4 pooled passengers, that's 6,400, and that's equivalent to like a 4-lane freeway with an average vehicle occupancy of 1.3 people. So, yeah, what do you and the panel think of repurposing our freeways as new mass transit backbones?
Well, it does raise the point that we do have all that infrastructure and there's all those vehicles and all those people. It raises, but the problem with that scenario is the people are on that highway, but then it's that access and egress, the first and last mile challenge again. What happens to them? And so, sure, we could run a lot of bus rapid transit on the that would be fine, but you still have to have all of those other services. So it raises the point in my mind that a lot of the challenge here is to get people to pool. Back to the behavioral question, because none of that's going to work. You know, you're asking people, I mean, you're highlighting the whole point of the goal of pooling, you know, because that was kind of the ultimate, what you just described there. So the only way it's going to work, and this is one of the reasons I really champion Uber Pool and Lyft Line. Are there any from Uber and Lyft here? They've been very quiet. Yeah, no one here. And they're just down the street, too. So they really have to be part of this discussion because they have a lot to offer here. But they're not doing Uber Pool and Lyft Line in many. Sacramento doesn't even have it. The problem is, at the end of the day, it seems like there's lots of Lyft cars and Uber Pools, and yeah, in downtown San Francisco there might be. But really, very few people are using it. The challenge is to get the density of ridership, to get a lot of people using it, and they're not. So like even Sacramento, 1 million people, metro area, they haven't brought Uber Pool and Lyft Line there because they don't have enough ridership there to build on. So somehow, that's why I'm a big champion telling these mayors and everyone else, including you all, that we really need to provide the incentives for that, to stimulate that. And I'll say something good about Zoox. So Zoox, you know, since we did invite a private sector partner, you know, this is exactly the kind of enterprises that we need to support. You know, they are committed as a business model to pooling. You know, Lyft and Uber, they're committed to it. They'll, you know, but they can't lose money. So then we can get back to it. And that's also the answer to rural. You know, I believe even in small towns, these kinds of services will work, but you got to get a lot of people, you know, participating. And we don't have that now, mostly for behavior reasons, but for others as well.
Yeah. Carpooling is really, really, really tough. It's tough for the kind of, you know, human behavior stuff. You know, people don't like to share. There's safety and security concerns if you're in a vehicle with someone you don't know. But again, kind of from the nerdy perspective, just the logistics of lining up those origins and destinations in time and making those trips reasonable is really, really tricky, specifically on a segment of freeway where you have like a many-to-many distribution pattern. You know, mass transit works in cities because it's kind of a lot. You know, people are feeding into high density areas, and so one end of that trip is pretty focused. So there's a real logistics challenge. That said, there's tremendous opportunity too. I mean, we don't have to go to that we don't have to go that far to really see big benefits. I mean, our average vehicle occupancy in rush hour is like one and a third. You know, so if we get one more people in every car, we're almost doubling the capacity of our roadway system. So yes, we have to use the infrastructure we have more effectively. One of the strategies we've talked about in the report is strengthening a regional express bus system to fill in a lot of the gaps that aren't there in the rail network. Use the infrastructure we have, with high occupant managed lanes where we can keep the traffic moving, HOV priority measures, direct access, things like that to really speed those trips up. And combined with some of the novel first last mile ideas, I think we can, there's tremendous potential there for sure. We have to use the asphalt that we have more efficiently.
Everyone, just want to give a round of applause to all of our panelists. As we mentioned before, the paper's online, so check it out. And thanks to all of you for taking the time out tonight. Hopefully you got some pre-dinner in you. Take some food on your way out. And thanks for everyone. Thank you.